The path to an ideal life starts like this. You're born into a loving family. The race begins when you go to school. You outrun a classmate in the playground. Somebody whispers, maybe a track and field scholarship. You get into that perfect Ivy League school, or maybe in the Pac-10, and you land that job that everybody wants. You find someone to love and you have beautiful children. And later in life, you give back to your society, right, your culture. You put it all in line, and it's a linear path. You set your goal, and then you march right toward it. If you're curious and you're open, it doesn't have to be that way. For me, it was never, ever like that. It started when I was in high school. It was a little bit difficult. In 9th grade, my mother invited me to leave her house. My father picked me up, dropped me off at this boarding school. And later, dealing with the after effects of childhood sexual abuse and facing the real possibility of going into a foster home. Part of me really wanted to give up, but I remember hearing in the back of my voice, Cammy, how are you going to get out of this one? You know, but it wasn't that drenched in sadness kind of, oh, woe is me, how am I going to get out of it? But it was kind of a cynical one, like I'd been in trouble before. And I really wondered, how was I going to get out of it? Because I knew I'd find a way. And I was curious by then, how would I find a way to get through this really difficult time? So I persevered, and I went through. I went to my state school, the University of Maryland, and I hadn't realized that what happened in high school was the beginning of so many left turns to come. So in college, I applied for a job in an algal physiology lab washing dishes. When I interviewed with a professor, he picked up my hand, he looked at my fingernails. Fortunately, for some reason, they happened to be short, probably from biting them. They happened to be clean under the fingernail. They certainly were not manicured. But my fingernails had a lot to do with the job, because I got the job, and for the next year or so, I was washing test tubes. It was really boring, but the man in the lab next door was fascinating. He was using an instrument in the engineering department. It was a new machine called a scanning electron microscope. They were just really being used productively in science at that point in time. So after a lot of pestering, I went with him to go down to the engineering department to use this machine. And electrons, start at the top, and through a vacuum, they're focused down on the specimen, which is gold-coated, bounced down, and collected. And then I think you can see, a three-dimensional image of something. And at this point in time, anything you put in there, no one had seen before. The first time we saw the eye of a fly. So I was smitten with this. I loved watching it. I heard about a conference in Chicago with this international scientist coming to talk only about scanning electron microscopy, and I had to go. So I got my best clothes together, which was a pair of jeans that I'd cut out the center seams and made a maxi skirt, filling in the bottom with orange flowered fabric. Put that and a couple other things in my VW Bug and drove from Maryland to Chicago over 2 days, slept on the floor of a friend's apartment. And then I hung around with these people from Oxford and Cambridge and the then famous IBM research labs. I met these two people, Colin and David from Oxford Labs, the metallurgy department, who invited me for an internship that summer to work on the first one of 3 million-volt electron microscopes and the first scanning transmission electron microscope. Opportunities I never even knew could have existed. I went. It was amazing. I went back to Maryland. So enamored, I wanted to take a lot more classes in electron microscopy. I was really interested, and those classes went really well. But my other classes, not so much. I ended up failing. I ended up failing pretty badly. Very badly. So then I needed to reapply and retake. I ended up redoing, but not after feeling humiliated and horrified and like a fraud in front of so many people and having squandered so much goodwill. But in the end, that failure never really affected any future job, never affected any future graduate plans. It just affected me here. So I did graduate a semester late. I went on to work at Johnson & Johnson, preparing an electron microscope lab for them, of course. And then I felt kind of odd there because it was a for-profit organization, and I had been used to the government and academia. And on the wall in the cafeteria, I saw a notice for a class in marketing in the pharmaceutical industry. I didn't know what any of those words meant, but I checked it out. Turns out it was an MBA at night, paid for by Johnson & Johnson. So I said, why not do that? So I did that. So it was really interesting to do that. Of course, nobody cared that I was doing it. It was a safe way to get off my path, to do a left turn, and it was free. Tuition reimbursement is a great thing if you can find it. That MBA set me up for the rest of my life. Later, I was actually able to get a job in venture capital. But before I got there, I was so anxious to leave. It wasn't J&J, it was another company that I was working on. I wanted to leave so quickly that I resigned during a softball game. And there I am, in the act. I had met some friends and worked on Wall Street, and I really wanted to work there because I thought I couldn't be bored. I had interviewed there for this venture capital firm, and during the interview I was asked a question. What's the market size of the industry that you're currently working in? I refused to answer. I thought it was proprietary information. So I was dismissed from the interview, told to go home. Of course, I didn't get the job. Then I thought about it and realized I really wasn't going to get the job, and really I should have answered the question. So I called back, and I got a redo on the interview, told him the answer, and I got the job. So sometimes if you're in that situation, you can always have another shot at it. So when I was working in venture, I had a very big left turn on my personal life when they moved me here to Silicon Valley to open up a healthcare practice for them. In total, I worked in VC for about 4 years when I impetuously quit to start my own consulting firm. I was writing business plans and helping to implement them for other companies, eventually realizing that I could do it for myself, and then I started 3 companies. 2 of them did pretty well, but it was that time where I was on my own that I learned to be truly confident and competent. I'd never reached that part, I think, if I had stayed in any of my prior positions. But all of that took its toll. I was exhausted, wanted to take a break, and stayed home with my family for quite a while. Took a leave of absence with my children. After a while, I was ready to come back and wanted to do some more. And then I took the craziest move, and some people think the stupidest thing I ever could have done, and I started to get on that train and go to San Francisco every day and do a master's in fine art and fashion design. It was a whole new thing. It was a test. I wanted to see how far I could go before failing. Really. So that first class, I realized I was in trouble because everybody was so much younger, right? They'd been designing and drawing their entire lives. This is just how I felt. Like a Plymouth, an old car. Eventually. Now, that from maybe the next one. Now, the back one, yeah. Yeah, that's it. Yes, this guy. This is how I felt, just like him. We had our first design review in Design 1, and the instructor, it's always in front of the entire class, so everybody sees the work you've done. And there was no question, not being a martyr, I was clearly the worst in the class. And I was over in the corner, with a few tears in my eyes, and the teacher came over, Sarah, like, what's going on, Camilla? And I'm like, what's a 55-year-old woman doing in this class? I don't belong here, clearly. I can't do it. And she said, you do belong here. You can do it. So I did it, you know. I didn't have to do this. I could have left, gone home. I didn't have to finish this. It's not rocket science. It's just a lot of do, undo, do again. But I stuck it out, and then pretty soon after, I could feel actually everything start to happen in the creative side, the right side of my brain. It started changing, and literally, my brain, I could start to think differently. My whole being changed, and I could think through the artistic, the creative side of life. And I, with my favorite classmates, went to Lincoln Center, and we showed our designs during New York Fashion Week. Perhaps with a little conceit, feeling a little smug and a little much of myself, that I started my last company. Right off the runway, thinking I've done many companies before, I started my own label. But it didn't work out, despite having the backing of so many people in the community, the Four Seasons Hotel, the Feminist Majority Foundation, Women's Health at Stanford, our clothes at the Met Gala, the White House. the Academy Awards. But confidence and good works won't get you there. We were simply undercapitalized. So now, I realized that my world is about leveling the playing field for women. And with my new company, Savitude, that's what our goal is, a marketplace for the working woman. My goal here today is for you, is to hope that you'll see that left turns really fit in your life when you meet new people, to listen to what they say, to get out of your comfort zone and stretch, to ask questions. I hope that you make one or two left turns in your life. Thank you.